Do you know if you can use Kai'Sa's legend ability to pay the cost of deflect? What about whether you can draw 2 cards from Hidden Blade when the unit's saved from Zhonya's Hourglass? Riftbound is an amazing game, but the rules can be pretty confusing sometimes. Today we're doing 12 more questions at 3 difficulty levels, one last time for this set, in this episode of... If you'd like to skip to any questions, timestamps are in the description. Also, if there are any rules updates or FAQs that affect these scenarios, or if I've made any mistakes, I will leave a pinned comment. Larger changes will get an update video. Your opponent starts a combat showdown by moving their Shipyard Skulker in against your Vanguard Sergeant. Your opponent passes, and you pass too. Your opponent then tries to play Fight or Flight. Is this allowed? No. As soon as both players pass focus without adding anything to the chain, the showdown closes. As this is combat, you will continue through to the next step, which is combat damage step. So your opponent has generously sacrificed their Shipyard Skulker to your Vanguard Sergeant. You have a Shipyard Skulker and a hidden Teemo Scout at a battlefield. Your opponent has a Kai'Sa Survivor at base. It's their turn and they play Brynhir to base. Do you have an opportunity to play your Teemo Scout from hidden before Brynhir's effect takes place? Yes. Hidden allows you to play a card during a later turn as a reaction, so at this stage Teemo Scout is a reaction speed card. Brynhir Thundersong's ability is a triggered ability, as denoted by when, and will go on the chain. This gives you an opportunity to play reactions. If Brynhir had a passive ability, worded as your opponents can't play cards during your turn, then you wouldn't have a chance to play your Teemo. Remember that in Riftbound, the act of playing a unit does not put anything on the chain. So you do indeed play out your Teemo, and your opponent chooses not to move their Kai'Sa into the battlefield and passes turn to you. You have a Viktor at base, and a Faithful Manufactor at a battlefield. Your opponent plays Singularity, choosing Manufactor and Viktor. Both units die when the spell resolves. Do you create a recruit at your base for Viktor Leader's ability? No. This situation plays out quite differently to the rules of Magic the Gathering. It's a wordy ruling, but essentially if a card leaves the board at the same time a trigger is satisfied, it doesn't trigger at all. For me, this was pretty tricky at first, but I do think that it's the more intuitive ruling. Doesn't make sense that a Viktor is being sucked into a wormhole, and then whilst being spaghettified, he sees his friend die and then spits out a recruit. A similar, though meaningfully different situation is Kai'Sa Survivor's Conquer ability. Say you engage in combat with Kai'Sa and another unit, say a Thousand Tail Watcher. The Kai'Sa dies in combat, but you have conquered. In this situation, you wouldn't draw a card for Kai'Sa's ability, though for a slightly different reason. Kai'Sa dies during the combat cleanup, where units with marked damage equaling their might are sent to trash. This occurs before the event of conquering, and of course before conquer effects, such as those of Kai'Sa Survivor, Qiyana Victorious, and others. Anyway, you don't get the recruit, okay? You have an undercover agent at a battlefield. Your opponent has a Pouty Poro at base. Your opponent plays Falling Star, with both instances of 3 damage choosing your unit. The death knell triggers, and you discard a Flame Chompers. Can you play it to the battlefield before you lose control of it? No. After the undercover agent dies, the death knell trigger goes on the chain, and a cleanup occurs. During this cleanup, control of unoccupied battlefields is lost. You have a Watchful Sentry at a battlefield, a Thousand Tail Watcher at base, and no cards in your hand. Your opponent moves their first mate into the battlefield, killing your Watchful Sentry. You draw, Ride the Wind. Your opponent then moves a Mountain Drake into the other battlefield, initiating an open showdown. When you are given focus, you play Ride the Wind on your Thousand Tailed Watcher into the first battlefield, and a combat is staged there. Eventually, your Thousand Tailed Watcher does engage in combat and kill your opponent's first mate. Do you conquer and score there? Yes. Conquering is the act of gaining control of a battlefield you haven't scored this turn. During your opponent's turn, you haven't scored yet. So, when you lose control of a battlefield in an opponent's turn, you will have a small window to conquer it and score. The other scenario that this might happen would be if your opponent clears the battlefield and then charms a unit into that battlefield and loses the ensuing combat. You're a beast and you're running a Jinx deck. You have Flash and Gust in your hand and a Shipyard Skulker at a battlefield. Your opponent has just passed the turn back to you and it is now the start of your beginning phase. Do you have a chance to play a spell to reduce the number of cards in your hand and draw a card from Jinx's legend ability? Yes. Abilities like Jinx's legend are triggered abilities. Triggered abilities have a trigger condition and an effect. Trigger conditions in general are denoted by when, at, and at the nth time. Jinx's trigger condition is an at, which defines a certain time it will fire off. That time is the start of the beginning phase. Her effect is contingent on having one or less cards in hand at the time of the resolution of the ability. Whether you have one or less cards in your hand does not affect whether the trigger goes on the chain in the first place. Now, if you're chosen to play Gust instead of Flash, you'd be in a worse spot. As the Shipyard Skulkers return to hand, by the time the trigger resolves, you'll still have 2 cards in hand. You could then still play Flash, since it states you can target up to 2 units, but obviously you would have been better off playing Flash in the first place. You are playing a Kai'Sa deck. Your opponent has a Qiyana Victorious at a battlefield. You move your Kai'Sa Survivor into the battlefield, initiating a combat showdown. You play Stupefy on the Qiyana. Can you exhaust your legend in order to pay for the deflect cost? Yes. Deflect is a mandatory additional cost you must pay. This is simply adding a power cost to the spell you are playing, and does not constitute a separate trigger. Kai'Sa's legend ability reads add a power, use this only to play spells. Since Stupefy's cost is now 1 energy and 1 power, Kai'Sa's legend can be activated to pay for the power cost. So Kai'Sa Survivor kills Qiyana in combat, and you conquer, score a point, and draw a card for Kai'Sa's Conquer ability. You have a Playful Phantom at a battlefield. Your opponent moves a Kog'Maw into the battlefield, initiating a combat showdown. You and your opponents both pass focus, and during the combat damage step, your Playful Phantom takes 1 damage from the Kog'Maw. Does your Playful Phantom then die from Kog'Maw's Death Knell ability? No. During the cleanup step, the units will heal prior to the Death Knell trigger. Healing occurs first, then Death Knell triggers, which would have gone on as pending items after the units die, are finalized later. So during the combat damage step, the Playful Phantom will take 1 damage, then it'll heal, then Kog'Maw's Death Knell trigger will activate, and it will mark 4 damage on the Playful Phantom, which obviously isn't enough to kill it. If you move 10 recruits into a battlefield against Kog'Maw, do you conquer before all your recruits die? No. During the resolution step of combat, a combat cleanup occurs prior to conquering. Death Knell triggers are finalized on the chain and will resolve before moving on to the step of determining who will establish control of the battlefield. Just remember, the part of clearing the contested status and conquering the battlefield, or it becoming uncontrolled, is the very last part of any combat. So yes, the correct play would have been to move 1 recruit in first, then 1 more after the Kog'Maw dies. You have a Master Yi at a battlefield and a Zhonya's Hourglass at base. Your opponent plays Hidden Blade on your Master Yi. As the spell is resolving, as a replacement effect, you use your Zhonya's Hourglass and recall the Master Yi to base, exhausted, instead of it dying. Do you draw 2 cards from the Hidden Blade effect? Yes. This is a rather confusing resolution, and I do wonder if Riot will eventually rata all similar spells to function the same way. There are 2 important points here. First, the spell doesn't say if it dies, its controller draws 2 cards. Second, in Riftbound, just because something is written on a card doesn't happen, that doesn't mean that the other elements of the card don't happen. Part of the silver rule is that you do as much as you can. Where in a game like Magic the Gathering, removing the target of a spell makes the spell fizzle, in this game there are many examples of cards where making one part of the spell illegal does not affect the resolution of the spell overall. That said, the most important question with Hidden Blade is, can the spell determine who's the controller of a legal target when it's resolving. Because Hidden Blade states kill a unit at a battlefield and its controller draws 2 cards, the target being a legal target and identification of the controller are the 2 key components. Zhonya's Hourglass doesn't affect either of these components and therefore should have no effect on whether you draw 2 cards. It simply replaced the kill part of Hidden Blade with the text recall it exhausted. Consider an alternative situation where Hidden Blade was played but you moved your Master Yi back to base as a reaction. In this situation, you would not draw 2 cards, as now the Hidden Blade has no legal target, it cannot identify the controller of nothing at all. This is a useful point though to discuss some of the other cards with similar effects, and the concept of null. Baited Hook is a classic example. If you choose to kill a unit with Baited Hook, and your opponent gusts the unit in response, what happens? In this situation, Baited Hook is trying to figure out what's 1 more might than the killed unit, which is no unit at all. The number isn't treated as 0 though, it's treated as null, something that cannot have calculations added to it. So Baited Hook couldn't grab 1 might units upon resolution in this situation. With that all being said and done, Master Yi returns to base exhausted and you draw 2 cards. You are playing an Ahri deck. You have an Ahri Inquisitive and a Stalwart Poro at a battlefield. Your opponent has a Qiyana Victorious at base and a Mask of Foresight at base. Your opponent plays Challenge, targeting their Qiyana and your Ahri. Ahri dies and 3 damage is marked on the Qiyana. Then, Qiyana moves into the battlefield, initiating a combat showdown. The Mask of Foresight and your Ahri Legend ability both trigger. Does the Qiyana survive these triggers? No. I swear, attack defend triggers have shortened my lifespan by at least a few weeks. Ahri's Legend ability reads as an attacker trigger, but it's actually a trigger controlled by the defender that triggers on opponents attacking. This is particularly relevant here, as if the might reduction occurs before the might increase, the Qiyana will die from the marked damage. Triggers controlled by the attacker go on the chain first, then triggers controlled by the defender. Then first in last out, so the defender's trigger will resolve first. So in this scenario, the might reduction from Ahri's Legend does occur first, and Qiyana will die during the ensuing cleanup before the might increase from Mask of Foresight's triggered ability. You have an undercover agent at a battlefield and a flame chompers in hand. Your opponent moves a playful phantom and a recruit into the battlefield, initiating a combat showdown. During the combat damage step, you assign 5 damage to the phantom, killing it, but leaving the recruit still alive. Your undercover agent also dies, triggering its death knell ability. Do you have a chance to play the flame chompers into the battlefield before you lose control of it? Yes. Wild stuff. Death knell triggers and combat damage triggers are unique in that they cause something to go on the chain after the combat damage step completes, but before the contested state of the battlefield is cleared and conquering takes place. So in this scenario, Undercover Agent's Death Knell resolves and Flame Chompers' discard trigger then goes on the chain. Upon resolution, you can play the Flame Chompers to the battlefield you once occupied with the Undercover Agent. As we established in a previous question, while the battlefield has been contested by an opponent, you maintain control of it. So you can play the Flame Chompers to the battlefield, great. Now there's units controlled by both players at the battlefield. This means that there's now a combat staged at this battlefield, where a combat is already trying to go through its resolution step. Because combat is now staged, you never move to the step that results in conquering and clearing the contested status. You simply just move to the next combat at this battlefield. So with all that said, Flame Chompers then kills the recruit, and you maintain control of the battlefield. No points are scored, and we just move on with our lives. You have a Kayn at base. Your opponent has Dr. Mundo at base with 20 cards in their trash, a Watchful Sentry at a battlefield, and no cards in hand. You move your Kayn into the battlefield against Watchful Sentry, the Watchful Sentry dies, and they draw a card, and you conquer the battlefield. You then use your last card in hand, Ride the Wind, to move your Kayn into the other battlefield. A showdown begins, and after you pass focus, your opponent has their own Ride the Wind, and they use it to move their Dr. Mundo into the battlefield against Kayn. As Kayn's ability is now active, he cannot take damage, and Dr. Mundo is way too chunky to be killed by Kayn, so the combat ends in a tie. Which unit is sent back to base? Kayn. This is essentially the same scenario that I presented in my Do You Know Your Stuns short. It asks who is considered the attacker when both players' units have moved into a previously unoccupied battlefield. While it seems logical that whichever unit moved into the battlefield first should be considered the defender, the opposite is true according to the rules version 1.2. The attacker designation is given to the player whose units applied the contested status to the battlefield, so usually whoever moved in first. So the Kayn moves in, no attacker defender designation is assigned as there's no combat. Then Dr. Mundo moves in, and now we try to determine who's attacking and who is defending. The game checks which unit applied the contested status to the battlefield, so in this case Kayn, and determines that he is attacking this combat. Dr. Mundo, widely known for his stealth, sneaks into the Grand Plaza and valiantly defends it. Because your opponent hasn't scored on this battlefield this turn, when your Kayn returns to base, your opponent conquers and scores a point. Pretty rough. And that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope this video was useful. The next episode in this series will be moving on to Spiritforged cards and rules. So if you have any Spiritforged scenarios that are wrinkling your brain, let me know in the comments. Catch you in the next one.